Iona Redbird walked through the dying light as if the sunset itself were grieving with her. Dust lifted in soft, lonely swirls around her feet, glowing gold in the last breath of day. The wind chased tumbleweeds like forgotten hopes, brushing her damp hair against her cheek. Her hands clutched a small cloth bundle. Everything she still owned, everything she still was. And though her steps were steady, her heart beat like a frightened drum calling for mercy. She had tried again that morning. She had stood on Warren Pike's ranch with her best posture, her braid neat, her voice gentle. She told him she could cook, knew herbs better than some doctors, knew how to make a pot of beans taste like it came from heaven's own fire. But Pike didn't even let her finish. He wiped sweat from his brow and muttered, "Ain't nobody wants trouble round here, Iona. Your kind draws eyes, whispers. Go on." The rest of her words died in her throat. She stepped away from his ranch with the sun already heavy on her back and a shame hotter still. Now, as she moved through town, the stairs felt sharper than spurs. Martha Pickens whispered behind a lace fan, her voice thin as snake hiss. There she goes again, always begging. Elias McGraw, the blacksmith, paused mid-swing with a hammer and watched her with pity that felt like another bruise. Sheriff Boone Kessler leaned against his porch rail, chewing tobacco, his eyes cold with suspicion. Iona tried to breathe past the tightness in her chest. The sky above her darkened, clouds gathering like old memories. The first drops of rain touched her face, gentle at first, then firmer, cold beads that turned her braid heavy and clung to her lashes. She whispered, barely audible, "Just a corner to sleep. Anywhere." But the world didn't answer. That a figure moved through the sheets of rain, slow, steady, shaped by storms. Calder Hayes, the cowboy people only spoke of in low tones, a man who preferred silence to company and shadows to crowds. He stood beneath the sheriff's porch earlier fixing his saddle, but now he lifted his eyes as she passed. His hat dripping silver rain, his jaw unshaven, his expression unreadable. Iona stumbled when her foot caught a rut in the mud. He stepped forward before he seemed to think about it. Their eyes met. No spark, no heat, just two people recognizing the hunger in each other's spirits. She swallowed hard. "No one wants to hire me as a cook," she said, her voice breaking mid-sentence. I need shelter." The words seemed too small for the weight behind them. Rain darkened her dress and cooled her skin until she trembled. Townsfolk paused their errands, leaning in with hungry eyes. They expected Calder to turn away. Everyone expected it. Iona lowered her gaze, bracing for the familiar sting of rejection. But Calder didn't turn. That he stepped closer, not enough to trap her. Just enough that his presence felt like a shield in a town full of sharp edges. Without a word, he slid his weathered coat from his shoulders and draped it around her. The gesture was small, yet it felt like a lantern being lit in a collapsing room. His eyes were gentle, quiet, holding no judgment, only understanding carved from his own private battles. Then, still silent, he began to walk toward the desert ridge where his cabin lay, his boots sinking into softening mud. He tilted his head once, a subtle invitation for her to follow. He didn't force her, didn't coax her, just left space for her hope to grow if it chose to. Iona hesitated, breath trembling in her chest. The rain washed the dirt from her dress, the whispers from her ears, and for a moment she could almost believe she deserved this small grace. She took a step, then another, until she walked behind him through the gentle storm. The desert stretched out under a rising moon, pale and watchful. The air smelled of wet sage and long-forgotten stories. Calder kept a distance that honored her fear, letting her walk beside him but never too near. As though understanding that trust was a slow-growing seed, the cabin appeared after a long trek, a lonely wooden structure carved into the land like an old prayer. Calder opened the door, lit a lantern, and the warm glow spilled across the room, chasing shadows into corners. Iona stepped inside slowly, feeling the quiet embrace of safety for the first time in months. Without saying a word, Calder reached into a small pantry and set out flour, dried beans, herbs wrapped in twine. He stepped back to give her space. Her hands, though trembling, moved with muscle memory, stirring, slicing, seasoning. As she cooked, the smell of warming herbs filled the room, soft and comforting like an old lullaby. Calder sat nearby, elbows on his knees, watching the fire rather than her. His presence was steady, anchoring, patient. Ayana felt something in her chest loosen, a knot she'd forgotten she carried. But just as the pot began to simmer, just as warmth found a home in the quiet between them, thunder cracked across the sky. Too close. Hoofbeats pounded through the rain. Torches flared in the darkness outside. Sheriff Kessler's voice cut through the storm like a blade. Hayes, open up. We need the girl. Rain pattered against the cabin roof like 1,000 fingertips drumming out an old warning. Ayana froze, the wooden spoon slipping from her trembling hand and clattering softly against the floorboards. Shadows from the lantern stretched long and thin across the room, trembling with each thud of hooves outside. Calder Hayes rose slowly from his chair, not startled, just steady, as if he had expected the world to test him tonight. Sheriff Boone Kessler's voice thundered again from beyond the door. Hayes, open up. The girl's wanted for trespassing on Pike land. Bring her out. Ayana's breath caught. She hadn't stepped foot on Pike's land except the front fence, only long enough to ask for work. This wasn't law. It was a lie made from gossip and fear, shaped by people who wanted her gone simply because she did not fit the picture they painted of this dust-bitten town. Calder turned his head slightly toward her. He didn't ask if it was true. He didn't need to. Something in his eyes said he already knew the shape of injustice too well, that he stepped toward the door and lifted the bar from its place, the wood creaking softly. But he didn't open it fully, just enough to face the torches and the angry silhouettes beyond the threshold. She's under my roof tonight, he said, his voice low, measured, steady as a river stone. She harmed no one. The riders gasped. Even the horses seemed to shift in surprise. Martha Pickens sat atop a wagon, her lace fan snapping open like a rattlesnake's warning. She stirs trouble wherever she goes. She cried. She doesn't belong here. Ayana's legs wavered beneath her, but she forced herself upright, fingers curling at her sides. She didn't want Calder to stand alone in a fight that wasn't his. Slowly, heart pounding, she stepped to his side, her profile meeting the glow of firelight. Her voice quivered, but her words were true. I cooked for your people, she told the sheriff quietly. Helped when I could. Asked for nothing but a day's work. A heavy silence stretched. Rain fell harder, murmuring against the roof. Lightning lit the sky, bathing her soaked dress and long braid in white fire. The men squinted against it, seeing her clearly in the burst of brightness. The cold, wet courage standing where fear once lived. The sheriff spat into the mud. You're not wanted on Pike land, or anywhere near town, far as I'm concerned. Now move aside. Calder's hand drifted to the side of his coat, resting near his holster, not drawing, not provoking, just reminding the night that quiet men carried storms inside them. You'll have to go through me, he said simply. Wind howled across the ridge. The flames on the torches flickered. No outlaw bravado in his voice, no anger, only a quiet promise, edged with a kind of sorrow that made the riders hesitate. Martha Pickens gripped her fan so tightly it bent. You'd risk your life for her? She hissed. Calder didn't look away from the sheriff. She asked for shelter, he answered. That's enough. Ayana felt something inside her swell, a deep, aching warmth that almost broke her knees. No one had ever stood between her and danger before. No one had ever spoken for her, not like this. She watched Calder's silhouette framed in the doorway, rain tracing silver lines down his shoulders. The lantern light catching the steady rise and fall of his breath. Lightning cracked again, illuminating every man's hesitation. Sheriff Kessler's jaw ticked. Calder did not move. Horses stamped nervously. One rider muttered, "He ain't bluffin'." Boone. Another shifted his reins, unwilling to challenge a man whose silence carried more danger than any shouted threat. Finally, Kessler glared at Calder, then at Ayana, his authority cracking like thin ice. This ain't over, he growled. But he turned his horse. The others followed, their torches bobbing into the storm like fading ghosts. Martha snapped her fan shut with one last frustrated flick and disappeared behind the sheriff's in moments. The ridge fell silent again except for rain and distant thunder. Calder lowered the door bar and stepped back inside. Ayana stood there, her breath trembling, the lantern light softening the sharp fear still clinging to her ribs. You didn't have to, she began. I know, he said quietly. But I did. He crossed the room and poured warm water into a bowl. Placing it on the table, he pushed it toward her so she could wash her rain-chilled hands. She noticed how gentle he was, how he looked away respectfully as she gathered herself. The kind of gentleness that asked for nothing in return. She washed slowly, breathing deeply, letting the warmth seep into her skin. Calder leaned against the counter, watching the fire instead of her, giving her all the space she needed. Something shifted between them. Not spoken, not clear, but real. Ayana felt it settling over them like the soft blanket of steam rising from the pot of herbs. When she finally looked up, Calder met her gaze. He didn't smile. She didn't either. They didn't need to. The silence between them became a warm room, steady, promising, full of a future neither dared name yet. And in the heartbeat of that quiet, Ayana understood something she had never let herself believe. Sometimes the shelter we beg for becomes the place we rise from. And sometimes the stranger who answers becomes the home fate always meant for us.